The COVID pandemic statistics are flung in our face all day long. They have been presented in a way that panics the people into agreeing to the destruction of the global economy. The World Health Organization did not establish any criteria to ensure that data from all countries was collected in the same way and under the same circumstances. In fact, the data has been collected in a totally haphazard way and changes from nation to nation. In my discipline, physics, this data would be consigned to the wastebasket. It would certainly not be used to decide the fate of the world. This video looks at some of the problems. Mathematical concepts are largely common sense. All mathematicians do is to express those ideas in numerical form or by formulas. I will just stick with the ideas. Let us suppose that you have an average height of 68 inches or 5'8". You are average, so I'm going to put you in right now. There you are, 5'8" or 68 inches. Now you know that there are other people taller than you, so let's have a look at those who are 4 inches taller than you. Now the average person has many people who are close to his height, but the people who are 4 inches taller than average don't have so many, so we are going to put that in with a red line. There it is. It's not as high as the green, and that shows there are not so many people at 72 inches as there are at 68 inches. That is also true for the people who are shorter by 4 inches. And there they are. Now when you go further away from the average, say 8 inches to 76 inches, there are even less, and it comes down quite sharply. Here we are. That is the number of people who are 8 inches taller than average. And down here, the people who are 8 inches shorter than average. And way out on the extreme here, we have some very tall people who are 80 inches. They are 1 foot taller than average, and we represent them by that little arrow. And similarly, some very short people are down here. So that is the distribution of the numbers of people at certain heights. In the middle, we have the average, most people. On either side, we have the taller and the shorter. And even less, we have who are quite a bit taller and quite a bit shorter. And at the outside, we have those who are very tall and those who are very short. When we put this all together and join the dots, we get the red bell-shaped line. This is the normal distribution and tells us something absolutely basic about statistical distributions. If a distribution is not normal, then something strange is going on. So to repeat what we have here, we have the normal person who is most common. We have some people who are on the tall side, but only some of them. We have a few down here who are really quite tall. And then over here, we have hardly any people who are really giants in our midst or playing for professional basketball teams. The experts have ranted on and on about flattening the curve, but we are dealing with the same number of people, so at the end of the day you'll have the same number of contagions. The virus will certainly get you eventually, but it is very unlikely to be serious. You can cut the cake any way you like, but you still have the same amount of cake. The number of people in the red distribution is the same as in the black. Flattening the curve is a pandemic management strategy, not a cure. The short-term gain is that the mortality rate may be reduced. The long-term pain is that when we flatten the curve, we increase the impact of other disastrous consequences. The national debt has soared into the trillions. It can never be paid. The government is not even going to try. It will keep on paying interest forever. About 25% of Canadians have lost their jobs. This does not, of course, include the elite, the bureaucrats, and the politicians. They still have their fat income. They lecture us from their lavish offices to stay at home. They are saying that to people who cannot afford their rent, or food on the table, or who are facing bankruptcy. The stress will create mental depression. Suicides are increasing at an alarming rate. We have seen this before in the Wall Street crash of 1929. The mental health issues will last a very long time. Families will break up, poverty will grow. Small businesses will go bankrupt. A lifetime of hard work will end in the gutter. Important surgeries have been put on hold. Many people will die as hospitals try and catch up on their backload, and that may take years. I know this very well because a friend of mine had his surgery delayed during SARS and died. Crime is already increasing. The socio-economic impact of the actions imposed by governments will be worse and last longer than the pandemic itself. So, what should we expect to see when we look at the virus statistics? Well, firstly, the novel coronavirus cannot distinguish between people, and people themselves are all biologically the same. So, the mortality rate in deaths per million people should be about the same for all countries. And those mortality rates should be bunched around the average. So we should get a distribution curve that is Gaussian, the normal curve. And the normal distribution is the most important distribution in statistics because we see it everywhere. Most people will get over the virus by themselves. However, the elderly and the sick may be helped by going to hospital. If the medical facilities are not overwhelmed, then all the seriously ill patients can be treated properly. The mortality rates are then as low as possible. The death rates will be highest in the countries with poor health systems that cannot deal with the seriously ill, and thus the curve, the normal curve, is pushed to the right. Now let us look at the actual data that has been collected across the globe. Now all these statistics are available at this particular site, Worldometers Info Coronavirus. It is a very complete data bank and even includes numbers from the cruise liners. It happens that this data is presented in a spreadsheet, and so I can simply pick it up and put it into my spreadsheet, and then I can very easily reorganize the data. And the first thing I did is I sorted out the data to show deaths per million from high numbers to low numbers. We want to look at the highest ones right down to the lowest ones and see if there is a pattern. This is what the data actually looks like, and the whole world has 213 rows across. And as I told you, I rearranged it so that the highest mortality rates are all in this blue column here, with the highest at the top. And you see that the highest is in fact San Marino, with 1,208 deaths per million of population. After I did that, I began to color in green all the countries that were in Europe. And here they are: San Marino, Belgium, Andorra, Spain, and so on, all the way down to Portugal and Monaco, and so on and so forth. I also included the numbers for the USA in dark green and Canada also in dark green, because they are of particular interest to us. Now that in itself is quite extraordinary. So who would have believed that if you take the highest death rates in the entire world and put them in order, they would mostly be European? In this slide, I am showing the data from a range of countries, from Australia in the far south up to Russia in the far north. And what you find again is extremely surprising. At the bottom here, Belgium, you have a surprising 735 deaths per million. But up here, we have Venezuela with 0.4 deaths per million. Now, when you translate these numbers into the bar chart, it makes it even stranger, because once again, as I said before, all these people at the bottom are the European countries plus Canada and the USA. Now I ask you, is it reasonable that China only has 3 deaths per million when somewhere like Belgium has 735? Do you really believe this? This slide shows the average of the death rates for Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Those groupings are already given on the website, so it is a very easy calculation. And the bars show the incredible difference in these 3 regions. Do you really believe this with Europe, an average of 164 deaths per million, and Asia only 7.1? You hear the experts say we need more tests. You would think that more tests would give better information and reveal more cases of infection, especially those cases which have no symptoms. But is that the answer? Look at these 3 points. They have the same number of tests per million, but they have very different numbers of cases per million. So in fact, this data tells you nothing at all. I have put in a trend line, but you can see from the data that that trend line could in fact be virtually anywhere. So this data is completely useless. So you can see that the data is such a mess that it's not really useful. And there are several reasons for this. Some countries want to save face by saying that they have everything under control, and their numbers are very doubtful. Other countries are unable to get the full data because the people die in remote areas. And some countries have very poor health systems, and they have no way of tracking the real numbers. And it is obvious that the outbreaks occurred at different times across the world, so the outbreak is not in step for all countries at the same time. And lastly, the World Health Organization gave no precise guidance regarding what data should be collected, the sample space it should be collected from. Is it towns? Is it hospitals? Is it urban areas? And they had no way to say how the sample should be taken. The same criteria, the same methodology should have been laid out for every country, and it was not done so. These problems with data validity and reliability are obvious to anyone with an ounce of common sense. Yet, we pay the World Health Organization $4.3 billion a year to tell us the obvious. They also have a staff of $7,000 who take 41% of that money, of that $4.3 billion in salaries. And only 4% of their budget is spent on medical supplies. So let us get back to basics. What is this all really about? And the only defense against the pandemic is herd immunity, and this has been true for every pandemic that has hit the human race. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I think this is a situation, the only situation which is going to save us. Eventually the herd will catch up with the virus and trample it to death, and nothing else will. I am not the only one who thinks this way. Here are some quotes from the press in the United Kingdom. The researchers, that is the Oxford group, suggest that the way to test their model is to begin an immediate campaign of population screening using serology tests for coronavirus antibodies. And that was March the 25th this year. They are not doing tests to see if you have the virus. They are testing to see if you have the antibody. And the Oxford researchers are right that massive testing would resolve this vital issue. So let's get started sooner rather than later. There has been no reaction from the world until recently, when on May the 14th I heard some authorities are beginning to collect this antibody data. That is almost 2 months, and this is the most important data we can get. The correct way to collect data is by using a random stratified sample. That means taking samples in such a way that all groups are represented in proportion to their population. Rural to urban, male to female, young to old. Here is an example. 20% of Canadians live in rural communities. Thus, for every rural person in the survey, there must be 4 urban citizens, so the ratio is 1 to 4. And we can make the same kind of ratios for young to old, rich to poor, and so on. This data gives an overall picture of the growth of immunity. It is the most important data we can get. It also provides data about the subgroups in society. So it's a very rich database. Now, we have wasted a colossal amount of money and a huge global effort to collect data from an unstructured situation. Now, herd immunity data is like fighting a forest fire. It tells us where to permit a slow burn, where to build a fire break, and when safety has been assured. It is the only real measure of the pandemic's progress, because you can see the charred earth where it's been. I have a great distrust of experts living in their well-furnished glass houses. And I quote from Sorieki and the Wisdom of Crowds. There is no need to chase the experts. Now, when I was a young lad, some 80 years ago, my mother would say to me when we went to church, "You can't sit near your friends because one of them has got a nasty cold." And she also made me wash my hands frequently. And that is the common sense which we're paying for dearly because our experts tell us so. Believe you me, common sense works just fine. Thank you.